Hello, everyone.
Hello.
Good to see you. Angela, are you there? Hi, Mary.
Hi.
I'm here.
Hello. We were just talking about chickens, so you might have wanted to hear that conversation. Angela has a character in her book that has chickens, right?
No, I don't think so.
No,
Oh,
Hard to remember.
Did I write about a chicken?
Yeah, I was like, what? Did I write that? I don't remember.
well, I know my other friends does a cozy where the one of the characters has a pet chicken. Maybe I'm confusing them.
I don't think it's me, unless I've got a split personality.
Hey, I don't know.
you could add chickens in your work in progress.
I could. They probably need
Yeah,
them.
yeah, a chicken would go good in that one.
Yeah,
or
I'm
a
sure they
couple of
have them in the compound.
Not sure you get much sympathy if they were the victim, though.
Well, welcome everyone. I'm Liz Tully. I am the present president of Sisters in Crime Atlanta. And this is our readers event, monthly event of Off the Shelf, where we interview an author. And Dawn Gepfer is our moderator. And I think we'll just let everybody chat for another minute to see if anyone else is coming. Charlie, you said Edie was wanted to come?
Yeah, but she had the same problem I did. It went to spam, and I couldn't find the thing. And of course, stupid, I didn't check my spam folder first, but it went directly to spam, and so did the one you sent later. So
You have to whitelist it, and yeah, but I mean, she could message. I haven't heard from her. I could have
Well,
sent her one.
her email was time dated 2 o'clock in the morning, so she may be asleep.
And Liz, when Kathy and I were chatting when Julie and I were chatting yesterday, we were talking, I was explaining the situation we had with the link and, not wanting to post it on social media. So she put in her social media platforms the email address, the Sync Atlanta email address so that people could. Okay.
Yeah. All right. Well, why don't you go ahead and get started? I mean, I can just let in any stragglers.
Okay, good morning.
After 10.
Good. All right. So we'll get started. Good morning, everybody. I am Dawn Gepfer. I am a member of Sisters in Crime Atlanta, and I am the moderator for Off the Shelf, which is a author talk virtual platform that we started last year, where we ask authors to come and chat with us and talk about their books and their writing process. And the goal of this program is to get readers and writers to come together, and for readers to have an opportunity to get to know authors on a different level than just by the bio on the back of their book. So today we have a brand new author. Her name is Julie Bates, and she is from North Carolina. And she's written her first book, and I'm going to try not to talk too much about her. We had the opportunity to chat a little bit yesterday, and I had to warn her. I was like, don't let us talk too much, because then when it's time for us to talk tomorrow, we're going to forget what we already talked about, and we might stumble over some things. And I feel like I'm already doing that. But anyway, Julie, I would like you to introduce yourself and tell us a little bit about you that is off the page. So tell us who you are when you're not Julie Bates, author.
All right. Well, when I'm not an author, I'm actually a public school teacher. I teach moderately disabled special needs children in a high school setting. Or as I know, we have adult bodies, kindergarten minds, and the hormones work just fine. But they're a neat group of kids. I've also been married several years to my husband, Bill, who frequently gets pulled into editing my books. Whether that's willing or unwilling remains to be said, but he does help out. But I have my son, Chris, And as you may have noted, more than a few animals, which it's not that I collect animals, it's just they show up. And when you feed them, they stay. So I have 3 huskies and 5 cats, and hopefully no more, because as I told my son, it's like, we don't have room for a pet rock. So we're going to call it at this. But I enjoy reading a variety of genres. Mystery is the favorite. I love doing handcrafts. I'm working on, I like to garden. So I'm more than just a writer, but I think who you are as a person does impact what you write about and how your characters develop.
That's very interesting. And so let's just go ahead and jump right into how about your story, about your character, Faith Clark, and how, based on what you just said, how she was developed, influenced by who you are.
Well, Faith Clark and Cry the Innocent came after a visit to Colonial Williamsburg. And my first visit was several years ago. And, we were learning about the Revolution and what Patrick Henry did and all these things. And the thought that went through my mind was, well, what about the women? Because at that time, they really weren't talking about the roles of women. And I thought, it's okay, how did women cope? What did women do during this time period? Because obviously they were there. And from that, and also I think because like most women, I work, and I'm well aware that you have to balance your family life and your professional life. And like most women, I've juggled with that through the years. As time away from, because it's time away from home, taking away from the time I spend with my son, things like that. And I thought about her struggles. I made her a widow simply because single women could not own property, and married women, their husband owned the property and ran the business, and they worked with them. And I wanted this to be about her. So she's a widow. She's come into this business after the sudden death of her husband, and she's trying to raise a child in this atmosphere where there's conflict. They're a colony, but there's a tremendous amount of conflict, and there's a push for independence. So it's a very unsettled time. So I was trying to give her things to overcome and things that would help her grow, and also to show how she's coping. Because to me, it's important for a character to grow, which this is a series. Because she is in her 20s, but she's having to learn to do a lot of things on her own. And a lot of the businesses in Williamsburg that were run by William were in the service industry, whether they were taverns. You will hear a lot of the taverns were run by women, typically widows. One of the newspapers was run by a widow. So the women you see and hear about are women who have had to learn to make it on their own because that husband wasn't there, whether it was because they died of an illness, accident, or something like that.
Julie, did you have a specific date in mind, a specific year, or were you kind of generically thinking of just a time period in those years?
All right. We're actually traveling through the time period of the American Revolution. The first book is set in 1774. There will be 8 in the series, and each one basically will be the arc through the revolution, because it starts 1774 and it's going to end in 1782 at Yorktown. So the American Revolution, it's one book for every year. So there's a lot going on in the background. There's not battles, in terms of fighting, but it is in terms of the economics, because sometimes the British are in control of the town, sometimes the revolutionaries, and you have to walk a fine line. And not too differently from now, you have people on the far right, people on the far left. Most people are just trying to get by. Because there are, there's partisanship even in the 18th century.
Of course.
Her goal is to try, her goal isn't to fight the revolution. Her goal is to survive and take care of her family. And she has a son, but she has extended, she has her husband's families in town, and the people that work for her, because there are a couple of characters, they start out as slaves, but they start out enslaved, and then they become free by the end of the book. Their lives are entwined with hers as well. And as I mentioned to John, my big conflict and my big struggle with this was, what in the heck do you do about slavery? People owning people is awful. We know that. Back then, it was seen as part of the economics of the time, because we're talking about a different culture. Things are viewed differently. And it took a long time in our country to grow to see all people have value, regardless of religion, color, sexual orientation, you have it. And we still fight that struggle to a degree. So I struggled about that. And as I read accounts, as you hear the accounts of slaves and how they're written about by people, some of it I found sickening, because they're talked about the way you would address her or pair of shoes or something like that. And I'm like, well, wait a minute, these are people. So what I came to was, I couldn't ignore it. That's just because, you cannot ignore 400 years of where people were treated as property. To me, that just didn't sit well morally. And then when I get to that, it's like, okay, what in the heck, what do I do with it? So what I chose was, I sought to show slavery with different people. And my character, she starts out with 2 slaves that were given to her as a wedding present.
Oh.
And she's got to figure out what is she going to do about this? Because she knows she was raised Quaker, and Quakers were among the first to realize slavery was not a good thing, that it was evil. She knows it's wrong, but she also knows she's barely getting by. How can she afford to free these people and put them on the payroll? And that is part of her conflict of, what is the cost of doing the right thing? Because we don't always discuss it, but a lot of times doing the right thing is costly, but that is by no means an excuse for not doing it. So I wanted to show that through her. And I decided, if I was going to portray enslaved people, and I'm choosing to call them enslaved rather than slaves, because enslaved says something about their condition. Calling them slaves is more of a label. But I chose to, when I write about them, I try to show them as people of intelligence and dignity, who through no fault of their own are in this position. Because I think the key thing is to realize these are people. They're not property, they're not possessions, they're people. But that was a hard thing for me to try to figure out how to deal with.
I kind of snickered right there at the end when you said that, because one of the things I wanted to ask you was, what was the easiest part? To me, just the fact that writing a historical novel and being accurate, and you really talked a lot about what I think would be some of the challenges with that. It's not, there's other things, of course, there's the elements, the living conditions, the fashion, the fact, and I was very curious about, I figured, knowing that Faith was a widow, that she probably inherited the tavern from her husband. And I was curious, like, well, how is that received during these times to have a woman business owner? So those types of things were also going through my head. So I was curious, with all of the research that you would have to do in order to create such an accurate historical setting and environment, what was the easiest part and what was the hardest? I think you just might have told us what the hardest thing was. What about what
Yes.
was the easy? What was the easiest thing for you to do in putting this together?
Probably I could understand the conflicts between working and raising a family, because I do that. And I think, women have always had that challenge, and I'm not knocking men. Obviously, I'm married to one, but men, have always been the ones to go out and work and then come back home. Whereas most of the time it's the women raising the children. And if you're a single working mom, such as Faye, you're doing both. So understanding the struggle and the fact that you always wonder if you got it right, you always feel a little bit guilty sometimes. Those are things I could identify with, even though her tavern is also her home. But still, you have to do both jobs and you want to do both well.
Is in colonial times, would a female have been accepted as a business owner, or is there another social struggle as part of Faith's life?
Actually, it's easier than this time period than it was in the 19th century, the Victorian era. But a lot of the taverns were run by women. Christiana Campbell's tavern. Christiana Campbell was a middle-aged widow. The King's Arms was run by Jane Vobe, also a widow. One of the newspapers, which it's interesting, there were 3 newspapers in Williamsburg and they were all named the Virginia Gazette. I haven't quite figured out why they all had the same name, but one of them was run by Clementina Rind. Her husband died. She continued the business. She published a lot of Thomas Jefferson's writings in her paper. So women did have a place in society. Now, whether it was easier or harder to do it as a woman as a man, I really haven't determined. I think, at the end of the day, the business was the business and people still needed a place to eat and drink. And in an age where there's not social media, taverns was where people gathered. And that was another reason for my choice for a business for her, because if you're working in a tavern, you're hearing everything that goes on. You're busy serving food and clearing your dishes and people talk. A lot of the patriots, once the royal governor dismissed the House of Burgesses, which that was the last royal governor, that was his solution to the problem. He basically dismissed what would have been their legislature and decided not to call them again. So he didn't have to hear their complaints about England. So they immediately started gathering in the Raleigh Tavern. That was their solution. So people would gather in taverns and talk. So this gives her an enormous resource of information and also a chance to connect with a wide variety of people. Because whether you were high society or working class, everybody went to the taverns.
Sounds like past day Facebook. Yeah, I like that. I'm going to interrupt here just for a minute because we did say that Julie is providing us with a couple of copies of her novel. So I wanted Dawn to explain how we're going to do that. We're going to put a little bit of a chance into whether or not you get one. But Dawn, why don't you mention that now?
Okay. What we thought we would do is, as our guests came in, I would make note of, I would write your name down and I'm numbering the list. And at some point, probably near the end, we'll have Julie call out a couple of numbers between, 1 and however many people we have on. And a couple of those people will win a copy of her book. And we will get that to you. You'll have to reach out to Julie with your address, and she'll get that to you. So,
Okay. Good luck to everybody. And actually, I do have a question. I probably should wait to the end, but since we're talking about research, one thing that struck me was you said that she's a Quaker. And I guess in my mind, I always associated a Quakerism or whatever you call it with New England. So were there many Quakers in Virginia at that time? Was it a common religion?
No, but with part of her backstory is Faith is originally from Pennsylvania, there were a lot of Quakers there, and that's where she met her husband. But after she married, she moved to Virginia with him, which, since her husband was not Quaker, that had caused some conflict with her family. But it's noted, like many women, you end up moving with your partner. And that's how she ends up in Virginia. And even though she's not practicing as a Quaker, she has that background. She has that culture she was raised in. But that's how that occurred.
Okay, that's
Well,
interesting.
I was curious about that as well, because I wasn't sure how easy or how acceptable it was to marry outside of the Quaker community.
Not really,
It wasn't that big of a deal.
Well, it was a deal. And you see that with Dolly Madison. When she married James Madison, she married outside the Quaker faith, and that was not accepted. And so Faith at the beginning does not have a lot of contact with her family because, first of all, she married an outsider and then she moved away. So that
Okay.
is an issue that's going to have a resolution at some point. And she comes from a large family, which families during this time period could be huge. So different family members are going to have different feelings about this. Some more harsh, some more understanding. And that's not very different from families today.
True.
A lot of families have split over COVID vaccinations, over politics, things that really shouldn't matter, but end up mattering.
So I can tell that you have done a tremendous amount of research. As we've been talking, you'll reference historical things that, almost as like random thoughts. I mean, if you hadn't already shared with us that that you're a high school teacher, I probably would have guessed, oh my gosh, she's a history major, or she teaches history. So you really, really have a lot of information. So here's my question. Did the interest in history come before or as a part of your research for the book?
I've always had the interest in history. I've always been a tremendous bookworm. And when I was a kid, we moved a lot. So a lot of my constant was the public library books, and I could lose myself in another world. And I read everything: science fiction, mysteries, romance, histories. I mean, probably, the first thing that sticks in mind as a child reading was Laura Ingalls Wilder, which, a lot, that is based primarily on her experiences. It's not biographical because there are some things she chose to leave out or repicture, but still it talked, those stories about the past time period did reach me. And also, I will confess this one, you might find it funny. My dad used to read me stories when I was a child, but it wasn't picture book stories. My dad loved Westerns. So I would get in his lap and he would read Louis L'Amour to me. So I guess you could say I had this influence early on to be interested in the past just from that.
Well, that's great. So now let's segue into your actual story and the mystery of it, because from what you've told us, it's very character developed. You put a lot of thought into who she was and the influence of the time period. So now tell us about the mystery that she gets involved in. Don't give away too much, but tell us about the mystery she's involved in and why you chose to write a historical mystery as opposed to just a historical times, story without a mystery, without a murder.
Well, the mystery part I can answer easily. I love a puzzle. I love being able to solve puzzles. So to be able to write basically, a mystery is just a literary puzzle. So to be able to write and put the clues in and provide something where you have to solve in your head was something I thought would be very enjoyable. Now, as to how Faith gets into this mystery, it's very simple because she doesn't start out being, oh, I'm going to solve a crime. She's on the opposite end of, I've got a business to take care of. But she finds a dead body in her tavern. As you can imagine, this is a problem. But she gets woke. In the first chapter, she's woken up by her cook because they have found this person murdered in their meeting room. And then we've got the added issue of this wasn't a stranger. This was somebody she owed a lot of money to, that she was in conflict to. And in a time period when the British are primarily trying to keep the peace, they pretty much want to solve this quickly because they've got other things, they've got to worry about uprisings. So she has a choice. She can solve the crime, or she can, or she can continue being a suspect and possibly be convicted of the crime. As you can imagine, that's not very appealing. So she feels highly motivated to find out who did this, so she is not blamed for it.
How do her, you had mentioned already that she has two slaves that were gifted to her, which was a surprise, but I didn't know it worked that way, or maybe I shouldn't say it worked that way. But anyway, so she has these two slaves, and what role do they play in the story and her solving the crime? Are they involved, or are they just sideline characters?
They play a powerful supporting role, because I think it's very clear she could not run this tavern without them. They are deeply involved in the running of the tavern, and I think the best way to put it, they know more about what happened or what possibly could have happened than she did. But there's a limited amount they feel comfortable revealing.
Mm-hmm.
I'll just put it that way, so that they know. And I think it's it's like any business. Some people in the hands-on operation know things, they see things that the person at the top doesn't.
True. True. I live it every day.
And there's also some personal involvement in terms of what could have happened to this dead person. So they have to tread very carefully.
So you had already met, we know because you've already indicated that you kind of have a path for this series, and that it's going to take us through different touch points of the Revolutionary War, which is great. That I'm fascinated by that. Are we going to see the same characters through the rest of the series? And how many do you think you're going to have at the end of the run?
Books or characters?
Oh, we'll start with the books. And then, I did ask two questions there, didn't I? Yeah.
Okay.
So how many books?
It's going to be the same collection of characters. In some of the books, one character may be more dominant than a character in a previous book, depending on the direction we're going in. Right now I'm contracted for 8 books. As so, one for each year. The second book, A Taste of Betrayal, is scheduled to come out in late spring. And I'm currently researching the third one, which is 1776, which, as you can imagine, was a very busy year for the American Revolution. But each one, the Revolution is backdrop. There are things going on, and there are characters they'll be engaged with. The Revolution is not part of the mystery, but there are some moments where it's going to connect.
Mhm. Mhm. And so now, as far as the characters, you said that we're going to see, the same characters throughout. Is Faith always the main character, or are you going to change it up a little bit?
Faith will always be there, but whether she is the primary protagonist in each book, not necessarily so, and that will depend on the circumstances, such as the third book, Rise to Rebellion. Part of that takes place in revolutionary Philadelphia, which she will be there because there's going to be some resolution with her family in that book, but there's other things going on that she will not be engaged with, simply because the fact she's dealing, a lot of her involvement is with family. And the mystery with that is going to be set among the 1776 Constitutional Convention.
So just out of curiosity, let's go back to Cry of the Innocent for a second. Is the story that you set out to write the same story that you ended up writing?
I think it evolved because I knew I wanted to write about a working woman with a family solving a mystery. When I hit the snag about slavery, it evolved. And then as I thought about, at this time period particularly, how the revolution would impact people and how different actions of one impacted one of another, it evolved a little bit. Because when you have to write a mystery, you have to think about the why, the motive. They talk about means, motive, opportunity. And in my mind, you have to have a powerful motive to commit a murder, particularly a murder this vicious. So I had to really, as it evolved, I had to think about why. What would motivate that? And you also have to decide, how evil is your villain going to be? And that can range, because sometimes you see villains that are complete psychopaths. You have no sympathy for them. Sometimes the villain surprises you and you realize there are levels on which you don't agree with what they did, but you can understand why they did it. And I had to decide which way I was going to go, and no, I'm not going to tell you.
Good. Don't tell us. The whole point of this is to get us curious enough about it to, go out and get the book, which is why the book giveaway is so exciting. So now the title. I love the title of the book, Cry of the Innocent. And I think I kind of understand based on what you've already told us, but tell us how you came up with the title and why it's fitting for the story.
I think the title is directly related to the research I did on slavery, because people who are marginalized are not heard. And it's very easy for people. It's very easy to accuse someone, to accuse someone of a crime who can't fight back. And people of color had no voice. Single women had no, a lot of times women had no voice. So Cry of the Innocent is about what is going on. Faith has to step forward and make herself be heard because she's a woman in a period that's dominated by men. And if she's going to prove her innocence, she has to be heard. And as I said, there's an echo of that, of people who need to be heard, but frequently aren't.
I like it. I like it. It makes sense. So now let's talk a little bit about your actual writing journey, because you have shared with us that you balancing work and home life, that alone is a full-time job. And I can attest to that, as can several other people on the call. And so, but to then throw in writing a novel, how did you carve out the time with your already busy full schedule to write the book?
It was a process. And part of that was also taking myself seriously as a writer. Because it's very easy to dream about being a writer, but to actually write takes work. And, it was a journey of years of going back and forth and spiral notebooks with little notes and things and stuff in it. And then to actually start typing it out. And I joined a critique book in the group, and they said, you need to write this. And one thing that helped was that, I was held accountable for producing that chapter every month for them to go through. And admittedly, first going to critique and getting critiqued was painful. You have to realize that this is growth. Because what we write is not Magna Carta. It can always be better. So someone's going to always ask you a question that makes you realize, oh, I didn't think of that. Maybe I should do da, 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 da. So it was a journey. But the fact is, if you want to write a book, you've got to realize it is a business. And, my heart goes into it, my interests, but you've got to make time to do it, especially now that I have deadlines, but you have to make time to do it. And you've got to make time to revise, to think, to have a plan, which I will admit, they talk about whether you're a pantser or whether you are an outliner. And the answer to that, especially since I do historical, is I do a loose outline. It's not like a Bible, but I will note what point of history I'm in and what things I want going on in the background. And then I try to think of what the characters need to be doing, what's happening around there. And even that, sometimes when I'm writing, I'll all of a sudden discover I'm writing, a character has decided to do something unplanned. And it's like, okay, where are we going? What is happening? And that's to me, that's part of the fun. You've just got to, you've got to think about where that plays in. As I noted, as with any puzzle, all the pieces still have to fit together.
So did you get up earlier in the morning? Did you write late at night? Did you tell your family? I don't know how old your son is, so I don't know how easy it would be to say, leave me alone for a couple of hours. I've got some stuff to do. How did you manage to work it in?
Well, he's currently 24, but this first book, it probably was a good 10 years in the making between life events and things like that. I didn't get up one morning and say, oh, I'm going to complete a novel. It was a process of, first of all, just learning, developing a little writing process, and also developing enough confidence to say, I can do this. And then I can send this out there and query it and get accepted, because in this business, you have to accept that rejection's part of it. It's your growth process. It's those that continue and grow from it that I think are successful. Admittedly, I'm not James Patterson, but I am grateful to be published. But I did have to set aside time and say, this is my writing time. And admittedly, usually Saturdays are good for me because I'm the only morning person in my family. My husband and my son are complete night owls, whereas my body says about 10 o'clock, you're done. So, I get up, I get the dogs out and in because the dog's opinion is their priority takes first. And I'm not going to argue with three furry faces saying, we got to go, Mom. So get care of the dogs, I get a cup of coffee, and then I can sit down and have a few hours to write. And when I get home from school, I like to carve out some time to try to get things done. The thing I'm working toward, I'm not always successful with it, is I really do believe you need to write every day. Now, admittedly, some days I come home from school and I'm done. Mentally, physically, I'm done. I know that the only thing coming out of my brain is blah, 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 blah. And so trying to write would be fairly pointless. But I do try to carve out that time because it's important. Because you need time to write, you need time to revise, you need time, and I need time also to research so I don't screw something up. Because like in the first book, I was going to have Washington make a brief cameo, and then it's like, okay, was he in Williamsburg in May 1774? I have no earthly idea. So I had to find out before I could do that.
Mhm. So you had mentioned that the writing part is a business, and that is one thing that I have learned. And one thing, it was something I didn't say initially, is that in our Sisters in Crime chapter, I am one of the readers versus one of the writers. And so one thing that I have learned through my new friends is that there's a part of writing that is, it's not just the fun part of telling your story and developing your story. There's the business side of it. There's the road to publishing and finding the agent and the editor. And as you had already mentioned, the rejection. But here you are, you've made it through that muddle. And now there's still work to be done, even though you're published. And one of the things that I have learned that falls a lot on the writer's shoulders to do is to get your story out to the readers, that you have to do a lot of marketing yourself. So what are some things that you have done to get your book out there and so that people are aware of it?
Truthfully, marketing is still something I am learning. But I think the things I have done, I've done guest blogs. I'm speaking with Sisters in Crime. I have my Facebook page. One thing I did decide to invest in, and I hope it'll pay out, is Kirkus reviews, which if you do a Kirkus review, it is a paid review, but Kirkus has been around since the 1930s, so they are very highly valued. And so we will see how that goes. I've joined the Historical Novel Society because that is an outlet. I think one thing I've learned that's important is the importance of connections. Interacting with people so that you can help each other out. Because Sisters in Crime is certainly a good model of this. Mystery Writers of America. And just people you meet who have similar interests. Those, I think, I'll help you on your journey. Because you'll find very quickly that the people who write historical novels also like to read them. And when you're in an organization, which I read a variety of genres, even within mystery. So you promote each other's books, you support each other, and I think that's the value of an organization. But as I said, I feel like I'm really a newbie where marketing is concerned, because I'm still figuring out what I'm supposed to be doing.
Yeah, they don't have a manual, do they?
What?
I said they don't have a manual, do they? You just kind of get thrown into
actually,
it.
Level Best Books, which is the publisher I use, they do have a manual, but it's figuring out, okay, I see this, how do I do that? I see that, but what does it mean? Because you don't have the background to understand how you achieve that.
Well, it's a learning process for sure. So
Yes.
now let's talk about something that you said earlier that was very, very interesting to me. You said it took you about 10 years to really formulate your first story. And now you're under contract to write 7 more. And obviously you're not going to be able to write them in 10 years. So how is that working out for you to, again, going back to your schedule, your already busy schedule, and you don't have the leisure of slowly working through this? You need to pop these suckers out. You've already got the second one ready to go, and you're working on a third one. So you're rocking and rolling here.
I still am down to the wire getting them in. If we want to tell the truth, because basically I have a year, you have time will get away from you very easily if you're not careful. And sometimes I'm more scatterbrained than I like to admit. I get busy with the dogs or something like that. And the next thing I know, it's like, I was going to write. What have I been doing for the past hour? Drat. So you have to be very careful with your time. So, matter of fact, the table right here by me has a stack of books that I'm at different stages in reading, getting background. Because I'm working on the structure, and then I'm putting notes about what things I want characters to do, which, that isn't a composition book. I use a computer a lot, but sometimes it's nice to have pen and paper just to jot notes and thoughts. And if you get an idea, because sometimes I'll get an idea in the strangest places when I'm not even really thinking of the book. It's like, oh, why don't I have so-and-so do that? So I do end up with some notes of scribbles. And sometimes I look at them, it's like, what am I talking about? But most of them are comprehensible later.
Mm-hmm.
But you have to carve out time. You have to plan in order to get it done. My goal is this time is to get it done quickly enough that I have more time to revise and review it, because I'm always going for a fuller, richer book. I always want each book to be better than the next. That's the goal.
So we're actually coming up on our time, surprisingly. So I want to go ahead and open it up to the audience and see if anybody has any questions or anything they want to comment on. To Julie.
I had a question. It's Kathy. Wait, let me see if I can
Hey,
get
Kathy.
I'll try to get my video back on. I've been running around. I taught high school for many years, and I'm not quite sure what your students, their exact level, but I was wondering if you shared with them that you're writing a book, and it would be so fun. I don't know if they are intellectually capable, but it would just be so fun if they were reading a little bit or studying a little bit about what you were doing. Do you ever kind of double dip that way?
Well, students I deal with are the moderately disabled, though I will say, because since I teach a self-contained classroom, I do teach U.S. history. So we do cover the American Revolution pretty thoroughly and have games and activities, and their responses to things, I think, helps me think about how characters and kids would respond back in that time period. But I very much enjoy working with my students, and they, as I said, their personality and their take on things a lot of times is different from mine. And I think that probably adds to when I develop characters.
Yeah. And
they
it
would
would
be reading my book because most of them are emergent or pre-primary readers.
right. They couldn't read it, but
I couldn't read it.
I wonder if they could draw, like if you read a description of Faith and they drew it, I don't know. It just seems like it would be so fun to have them in some way take part and just put that on I just can't imagine how thrilled their parents would be if they were participating somehow in something like that, because sometimes there are limits, but then sometimes kids exceed those limits, and it's so fun to watch. But I also thought it was really cool when you said that faith is always there throughout the books. And I thought that's very symbolic. I don't know if you did that on purpose or not, but I thought, yeah, if you don't have the faith that you're going to make it, you probably won't. So I thought that was really cool.
Well, thank you.
Anyone else have a question? And by the way, Kathy, that was a great question. I like that. I wish I had thought of it.
Well, it's English lit, so I have a different viewpoint, vantage point.
Sharon, were you going to say
So,
something?
so it sounds like you're very careful with naming your characters, or the other characters so much, like, Faith is obviously a very symbolic name, but, what about the others? Do they have kind of symbolic names too? And then I also thought maybe with the kids, that would be something to maybe let them be characters in a future story or something like that, use their names or something like that.
Yeah,
So
good
I've been to-
behavior.
I've been to conferences where they have auctions, like, trying to raise money for something, and people can pay for the opportunity to be a character in an author's book. You can, the author of your choice would do that. There's one that I go to that every year there's one woman signs up to be in everybody's book. So
I've heard of her, Sharon.
Deb Holt.
I've heard of her.
So, but have you ever thought about doing that, like with your kids?
I have not. You just have to be careful that it's a name that you would find in the 18th
Oh,
century.
that's true. Yeah. Have to
Because we
make it
are
historically
very
correct.
culturally diverse in the 21st century.
Mhm.
Mhm. Yeah. But to Sharon's point, she was asking about the intentionality behind some of the names aside from Faith of your characters. Was there anything significant?
Well, to a degree, because one thing I decided early on, I wasn't going to give anybody a name that was silly or demeaning, especially when you're dealing with the enslaved population. One of the ways I wanted to give them dignity was with their names. So they never have something that sounds silly, because some of the ones in the, because when you read the accounts, some of the names there, because owners would frequently change names to what they wanted.
Oh,
If people pick up a stray dog and would change the name, whatever. So I wanted to give them the dignity of their name. So like the cook in Faith's household, her name was Olivia. And that's just because I wanted her to have dignity. I try to match, to keep the name with what would be their societal standing just a little bit, even though Faith is definitely working class. There is a societal structure even in colonial America. Like George Washington, he was of the upper stratum, especially after he married Martha, because Martha owned owned a heavy amount of property in colonial Virginia. Marrying her was a big prize, because between what she brought to her first marriage and what her late husband gave her, she owned a serious amount of farmland. So that family was on the upper crust. The Randolph family, these were people who were on the upper end of society. And then you have working class people, the people around the newspapers, the taverns, whatever. And then you have the people who were enslaved, the indentured servants, which, I do one of my major characters is an immigrant who's working off his indenture. But I wanted to make sure that they had the dignity, that their name gave them some dignity, that they weren't marginalized or silly. And that was important. Now, I have drawn some names from the Bible, because those are names I could be fairly certain would be used in the 18th century, because the Bible far outdates that. And I try to stay with names that I have found, whether in historical records or whatever, that would fit with that time period. Because there's certain names, such as, in the 18th century, there aren't many girls named Ashley. You don't see the name at all. You don't see people named Tamika or Rayshawn or things like that. That doesn't mean they couldn't be. It's just you don't see it in the accounts. And I try to stick with what would be most likely.
So I think we're coming to the end of our time, and I certainly appreciate your time today, Julie, and everybody for joining us. So shall we do a drawing? Okay, so we're going to give away 2 copies of your book?
That's fine.
Okay. All right. So I need you to please pick 2 numbers between 1 and 9, and we'll find out who is going to get a copy.
Okay, let me know when you're ready.
I'm ready.
All right, let's go with 3
Okay.
and 7.
All right. Here's who we have. Angela Costa and Mary Chamberlain. Mary's on
Great.
you.
I look forward to reading it. That's wonderful. Thank you so much.
Yep. All right. So congratulations, Angela and
Congratulations.
Mary.
All right, and I will get the addresses to send them to them.
Yeah, Julie posted in the chat. She posted her email address. It's juli.dates@gmail.com. And Angela and Mary, if you will reach out to Julie by email and share your contact information, she'll take care of you.
Thank you. That's
All right.
exciting.
All right, and I hope you enjoyed the book. And if you have a moment, you can put a review on Amazon. That would be appreciated.
Will do.
So,
Thank
Thank you.
yeah,
Thanks,
and again,
Julie.
thank you everyone for joining us today. I think we had a good crowd. It was very interesting chatting with you, Julie. We wish you the best.
Yes, good luck
Um,
with your series. That's awesome.
Thank
Yeah,
you.
I love that you have a contract for so many, because a lot of times we hear that people just get 3.
Yeah.
So it's really exciting and good for you right out of the gate. That's wonderful.
Thank you.
Yeah, it really is.
All
All right,
right.
and join us next month, everyone, when we're going to interview a former member of Sisters in Crime Atlanta, Wanda Morris, who was also just released her first mystery. And,
Yes. Mhm.
that should be a pretty interesting chat with her too. So have a great day. Thanks for coming. I know we switched it up to an earlier time frame, so now everyone has the rest of their day to go out and enjoy. Well, it's kind of cold still here, and nasty. But
Yeah.
enjoy your weekend.
Julie had a snow day yesterday.
Oh,
That's
Yes,
how
and we
cold-
had
yeah.
we had more snow overnight. We had like about 2 inches. So I'm
Wow.
probably going anywhere today.
Where are you? Are you in, did you say South Carolina?
North Carolina.
North Carolina. Oh yeah. So
I'm in the Piedmont of North Carolina, which
have fun with that. Get the
Nailed.
snowbirds out and the snow
well, thank
shovel.
you.
Yeah. We don't have to worry about it too much in Atlanta. Every now and then we do. But
Yeah.
anyway, well, again, thank you, everybody. I look forward to connecting with you all next month. And I do hope that, Julie, you'll consider joining us again in the future as we talk to other authors and, maybe even getting a little bit involved in Sisters in Crime nationally or with your local chapter.
Okay, and I see Mary posted her address in chat, which I would encourage her to email it to me because I probably won't have access to the chat after this.
Yeah, Mary. I can say that, you guys. She's a friend of mine from high school. I can pick on her.
Okay.
Okay.